The diplomatic ship Starlight Accord floated in the darkness of space like a silver needle against black cloth. Inside its polished halls, species from 100 worlds walked together, talked together, and pretended to trust each other. It was a place of words, not weapons, a place where wars were supposed to end before they began. Park stood in the corner of the main conference room, watching everything and saying nothing. This was his job. This was his life. He wore heavy combat armor that covered him from neck to boots, dark gray metal plates that had stopped bullets, blades, and plasma bolts over 15 years of service. The armor had scratches and dents that he never polished away. Each mark was a memory. Each scar on the metal matched a scar on his skin beneath it. He was 42 years old, but he looked older. His face was hard and weathered, like stone that had been left out in too many storms. His eyes were dark and calm, the eyes of a man who had seen terrible things and learned to carry them quietly. He never smiled in public. He rarely spoke unless spoken to. Most of the aliens on this ship thought he was a machine. Ambassador stood at the center of the room, and she was everything was not. She was young, only 31, with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She wore flowing diplomatic robes of white and silver, and she moved through conversations like a dancer moves through music. She was brilliant. Everyone said so. She had ended 3 border disputes in her first year. She had brought peace to the hollow moons of Tethys. The Galactic Council called her the future of human diplomacy. Had been assigned as her personal guard 6 months ago. In that time, she had spoken directly to him perhaps 20 times. She did not like what he represented. She had made this clear in small ways, in the slight curl of her lip when she looked at his armor, in the way she introduced him to other diplomats as my security attachment rather than by his name. He did not mind. He was not here to be liked. He was here to keep her alive. Today, they had come to beg for help. They were in species, tall and thin with 4 arms and large eyes that reflected light like wet glass. They had traveled for 3 weeks to reach this meeting, and their desperation filled the room like a smell. Their leader, a creature called Speaker Hollow Voice, stood before the council table with his head bowed. Please, they said, and his voice was indeed hollow, a clicking whisper that the translation devices turned into words. They come to our worlds, they take our people, they take our children, they put them in camps, and they harvest them for food, for sport. We have no soldiers, we have no weapons, we have only our voices, and they do not listen to voices. Watched thus 4 hands tremble as he spoke. He watched the way the alien's large eyes glistened with moisture that might have been tears. They were a peaceful species. They had never developed weapons because they had never needed them. For 10,000 years, they had lived quietly on their jungle worlds, building beautiful cities and composing music that other species traveled light years to hear. Then they had found them. They were predators in the truest sense. They were massive reptilian creatures who believed that strength was the only law. They had conquered 11 species in the last century. They did not negotiate. They did not trade. They simply took what they wanted, and what they wanted most was fear. Ambassador listened to them with a carefully neutral expression. When Speaker Hollow Voice finished, she folded her hands on the table and spoke in her smooth, professional voice. The Galactic Council extends its sympathy to the people. Your suffering has been noted and recorded. However, the Council's position on military intervention remains unchanged. We believe that lasting peace can only be achieved through diplomatic channels. The eyes flickered with confusion. Diplomatic channels? They do not have diplomats. They have only soldiers and slaves. You cannot negotiate with them. We have tried. They ate our negotiators. His expression did not change. Then perhaps alternative approaches must be considered. Economic sanctions, trade restrictions. The Council has many tools available. Tools? This voice rose, and his translator struggled to keep up with his distress. Ambassador, they are eating our children. They are not interested in trade. They are interested in meat. Felt something twist in his chest. He had seen this before. He had seen powerful people use careful words to do nothing while the helpless suffered. He had seen committees form and reports written while entire species burned. Spread her hands in a gesture of false helplessness. I understand your frustration. Truly, I do. But humanity has evolved beyond the simple solution of violence. We cannot solve every problem in the galaxy with guns and soldiers. That is the old way, the primitive way. We must show the galaxy that humans are more than warriors. They stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, the hope drained from his eyes like water from a cracked cup. Watched it happen. He had seen that look before too. It was the look of someone realizing that help would not come, that they were alone, that their people would continue to die while the powerful made speeches about peace. I see, Speaker Hollow Voice said quietly. Thank you for your time, Ambassador. He turned and walked toward the door, his four arms hanging limp at his sides. His delegation followed him, 7 who had traveled across the galaxy carrying the hope of their species, now returning with nothing but pretty words. Made a decision. As the past near his position by the wall moved, it was a small movement, just a shift of his weight that brought him close to Speaker Hollow Voice for a brief moment. In that moment, he pressed a small data chip into one of his hands. Coordinates, whispered, his voice so low that only the sensitive hearing could detect it. Retired human soldiers, they answer to no government. Tell them sent you. Tell them the situation. The eyes widened, and for a moment, something like hope flickered back to life in those wet, glassy depths. Thank you, the breathed. And then he was gone, walking out the door with his delegation, the data chip hidden in his closed fist. Returned to his position against the wall, his face showed nothing. His posture revealed nothing. He was just a guard doing his job, a machine in armor, a relic of humanity's violent past. But someone had seen. Elder Myra sat in the corner of the room, so still and quiet that most people forgot she was there. She was ancient, her species one of the oldest in the galaxy, and her mind could touch other minds like fingers touching water. She had felt his decision before he made it. She had felt the quiet fire that burned beneath his silence, the grief and the determination and the stubborn belief that protecting the innocent was never primitive. She watched the human soldier stand motionless against the wall, and she thought about all the things that hid behind silence. Across the room, Ambassador was already talking about the next item on the agenda, her voice bright and confident, completely unaware of what had just happened in the shadows of her own conference room. But she would learn, soon enough she would learn. And when she did, everything would change. 3 days passed before Ambassador discovered what had done. 3 days of meetings and dinners and carefully crafted speeches. 3 days during which the data chip traveled across space toward people who still remembered how to fight. It was Lieutenant Bora who accidentally revealed the truth. She was young, only 24, with bright eyes and a face that had not yet learned to hide what she felt. She served under and thought he was the greatest soldier who had ever lived. She had heard stories about him since she was a child. The Battle of Nexus Station, the Siege of the Crimson Dust, the time he had held a breach in the hull for 6 hours while civilians evacuated, his armor melting around him from plasma fire. She did not know how to keep secrets from powerful people. It is good that Captain Park helped Bora said during a routine security briefing with the ambassador's staff. At least someone on this ship remembers why humans became protectors in the first place. The room went quiet. His assistant, a nervous man with thin hair, looked up from his tablet with wide eyes. Herself had been reviewing documents, but now she set them down with careful, deliberate movements. What did you say? Asked. Bora realized her mistake immediately. Her face went pale and she looked toward the door as if hopping might appear to save her. He did not. He was standing guard outside, unaware that his act of mercy was being exposed. Nothing, Ambassador, I spoke out of turn. No, his voice was ice. You said Captain Park helped explain. Bora tried to find a way out, but there was none. She was a soldier, not a politician. She did not know how to twist words into shields. In the end, she told the truth because it was all she knew how to do. He gave them a data chip, coordinates for retired soldiers who might help them, people outside the official military, people who could fight without involving the council. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Stood slowly. Her face had become a mask, smooth and hard and completely without warmth. She straightened her robes and walked to the door. "Dismissed," she said to the room. "All of you, except you, Lieutenant. You will summon Captain Park to my quarters in 1 hour. You will tell no one about this conversation." Bora saluted with trembling hands and fled. 1 hour later, stood in Ambassador's private quarters. The room was large and elegant, filled with artwork and soft lighting and furniture that cost more than most people earned in a year. Stood by the window, looking out at the stars, her back to him. "Close the door," she said. He did. "Do you know why I requested you for this assignment?" she asked, still not turning around. "No, Ambassador." "Because I wanted to prove something. I wanted to show the galaxy that humans could change, that we could send our most decorated soldier to stand behind a diplomat, silent and harmless like a trained dog. I wanted them to see that we had evolved." She turned to face him, and her eyes were burning. "And what did you do? You proved them right. You proved that humans cannot be trusted, that no matter how much we try to be civilized, we will always find a way to choose violence." Said nothing. He stood at attention, his hands at his sides, his face empty of expression. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" demanded. "They were dying, Ambassador. They are not our responsibility." "Then whose responsibility are they?" His hands clenched into fists. "That is not your decision to make. You are a soldier. Your job is to follow orders, not to conduct foreign policy from the shadows." "I followed no orders," said quietly. "I gave no orders. I simply provided information to people who asked for help." "You went behind my back. You undermined my authority. You made humanity look like exactly what I have spent my entire career trying to move us past." She stepped closer to him, her voice rising. "Do you know what they call us out there? They call us the galaxy's attack dogs. They call us savages in pretty clothes. They invite us to their peace conferences because they are afraid of what we might do if they do not. Is that what you want? Is that the legacy you want for our species?" Remain silent. "Answer me," shouted. "What would you have me say, Ambassador?" His voice was calm, steady, like a stone in a river. "Would you have me apologize for trying to save children from being eaten? Would you have me regret giving hope to people who had none? I would have you understand that there is a bigger picture, that every time a human picks up a weapon, we take a step backward. That peace is built on trust, and trust cannot exist when we keep proving that we are monsters." Something flickered in his eyes then. It was small and quickly hidden, but it was there. Pain. Old, deep pain that had lived inside him for longer than had been alive. "I have fought in 11 wars," he said quietly. "I have bled on 14 worlds. I have buried friends and enemies and innocent people who got caught between. Every scar on this armor came from standing between the helpless and the things that wanted to hurt them. You call that being a monster. The people I protected called it salvation." Shook her head. "That is exactly the kind of thinking that keeps us trapped in the past. You speak of protection, but what you really mean is dominance. You like violence. You are comfortable with it. You cannot imagine a universe where problems are solved without bloodshed because you have never tried to imagine it." "I have imagined it," said. "I have dreamed of it. I have prayed for it, Ambassador, in languages you have never heard, to gods you have never known. But wishing does not make it so. They do not care about your dreams of peace. They care about power and meat and the screams of the weak. And so we should become like them. We should match their violence with our own. We should protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is what humans do. That is what we have always done." Laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. That is what humans tell themselves. The truth is that we enjoy it. We enjoy being needed. We enjoy being feared. We enjoy having an excuse to unleash the darkness inside us. She pointed at his armor, at the medals that hung over his heart. How many species' blood is on those decorations, Captain? How many worlds burned so that you could feel like a hero? His jaw tightened, but he did not look away. Every battle I fought was to save lives, Ambassador. And how many lives did you take to save them? 100, 1,000, 10,000, she shook her head. You are a walking monument to everything humanity should be ashamed of. You are proof that we are exactly what they fear, a species of killers who dress up murder as righteousness. The words hung in the air between them like poison. You are dismissed from my detail, said finally. I will request a replacement from command, someone younger, someone who has not spent their entire life learning how to kill, someone who understands that the future belongs to those who can solve problems without bloodshed. She turned back to the window, dismissing him with her posture as much as her words. I do not want a killer's shadow following me anymore. Stood motionless for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice soft and terribly calm. Is that all, Ambassador? Yes, get out. He turned and walked to the door. His footsteps were quiet, almost silent despite the weight of his armor. At the door he paused and for a moment thought he might say something more, might defend himself, might argue. But he simply opened the door and stepped through, and then he was gone. In the corridor outside, Elder Myra waited. The ancient creature had felt everything through the walls, every word and every emotion, and now tears ran down her wrinkled face. Not for the insult, not for the injustice. She wept because she had touched his mind in that final moment, and she had felt what lived beneath his silence. Not anger, not resentment, just a grief so deep and so old that it had become part of him, like bones or blood. The grief of a man who had spent his whole life trying to protect others, and had finally learned that some people did not want to be protected, that some people would rather let the innocent die than admit that sometimes, violence was the only shield the helpless had. Walked past her without a word, and Elder Myra watched him go, wondering what would happen when a man like that finally stopped holding himself back. She was afraid to find out. She was also afraid that the galaxy would soon find out for her. The armory of the Starlight Accord was deep in the belly of the ship, past the crew quarters and the engineering sections, in a place where diplomats never visited. It was a cold room filled with weapons racks and storage lockers and the smell of gun oil and metal. Most of the crew had never been inside. There was no reason to. This was a ship of peace, after all. Walked through the empty corridors alone. It was late in the ship's cycle, what they called night, even though there was no sun to set. The halls were dim and quiet, lit only by emergency strips along the floor. His footsteps echoed against the metal walls, a steady rhythm that matched the beating of his heart. He did not feel angry. That surprised him a little. He had expected anger or at least bitterness after everything had said to him. But there was nothing like that inside him. Only a strange, heavy peace, like the calm that comes after a long illness finally breaks. He had made his decision somewhere between her quarters and the armory. He had not planned it. He had not thought it through. It had simply arrived in his mind fully formed, like a flower that had been waiting to bloom. He was done. The armory door recognized his authorization code and slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the room was dark until sensors detected his presence and brought the lights up slowly. Weapons gleamed on their racks. Body armor hung on stands like empty soldiers. It was a room full of sleeping violence, waiting to be awakened. Walked to his personal locker and stood before it for a long moment. His reflection looked back at him from the polished metal surface. A tired man in gray armor. A soldier who had been fighting so long that he had forgotten any other way to live. He began to remove his armor. The chest plate came first. It was the heaviest piece, designed to stop direct hits from most known weapons. He had worn it for so long that his body felt strange without its weight, lighter, smaller, vulnerable in a way he had not been vulnerable in 15 years. He set it on the bench beside him and looked at it. There was a scar across the front, a long burn mark from a plasma bolt that had almost killed him on Nexus Station. A young girl had been hiding behind him when the shot came. The armor had taken the hit meant for her tiny body. She had grown up to become a teacher on her. He wondered if she was still alive. He wondered if they had found her yet. The arm guards came next, then the leg plates, then the back piece that had saved his spine twice. Each piece of armor had a story. Each scratch and dent was a memory of someone he had saved or someone he had lost. He laid them out on the bench like the pieces of a puzzle, a picture of his entire adult life reduced to metal and carbon fiber. When he was finished, he stood in the simple black that soldiers wore beneath their armor. He felt naked, exposed, like a turtle pulled from its shell. He looked at himself in the locker's reflection again. Without the armor, he was just a man, just a middle-aged human with gray in his hair and lines around his eyes. Nothing special, nothing frightening, just flesh and blood and bone. The door to the armory opened behind him. Captain Chief's voice was rough with surprise. He was an older man, 63 years old, with thick hands and a face like crumpled leather. He had served with his father 30 years ago. He had been at the funeral when that good man had been buried. "What are you doing here at this hour?" Did not turn around. "I am leaving, Chief." Leaving? Stepped closer, his eyes moving over the armor laid out on the bench. "What do you mean, leaving? Leaving for where?" "I do not know yet." Was quiet for a moment. Then he walked around to face directly, and his old eyes were sharp and worried. "What happened? Did something happen with the ambassador?" "Yes and no." Finally looked at him. "She told me some truths that I needed to hear. She reminded me of what I am." "And what is that?" "A soldier, a killer, a man who solves problems with violence." He smiled slightly, but there was no happiness in it. "She says that humanity has evolved past the need for people like me. Perhaps she is right." Made a sound that was half laugh and half growl. "That woman does not know what she is talking about. She has never seen what the galaxy really looks like. She has never smelled a battlefield or held a dying friend or stood between monsters and children. She reads reports and gives speeches and thinks that makes her wise. She is wise in her own way. She wants peace. That is not a bad thing to want." "Peace?" Spat the word like it tasted bad. "Peace is what happens when all the enemies are dead or too afraid to fight. It does not come from wishing. It does not come from speeches. It comes from people like you, people who are willing to stand in the darkness so that others can live in the light." Reached into his locker and pulled out his service weapon. It was a simple plasma pistol, well-maintained and perfectly balanced. He had carried it for 12 years. He handed it to. "Keep it maintained," he said. "Someone might need it someday." Took the weapon with trembling hands. "Where are you going?" "There are people who need help. People that the Council has decided not to help. People that the ambassador believes are not worth the cost of protecting." Began walking toward the door. "I cannot change what humanity is becoming. I cannot stop the diplomats from deciding that the helpless must suffer so that our reputation can improve. But I can still make a choice for myself." "You are going to fight the," said. It was not a question. "I am going to teach others to fight them. I am going to give the slaves and the prisoners the tools they need to free themselves. The ambassador does not want human soldiers fighting human wars. Fine. Then I will teach non-humans to fight their own wars. I will show them that they do not have to wait for rescue, that they can rescue themselves." That is a death sentence, one man against an empire. Stopped at the door and looked back. Maybe, but a death in service of the helpless is better than a life spent watching them suffer. My father taught me that. You knew him. You know I speak the truth. His eyes filled with tears. He had loved his father like a brother. He had watched grow from a small boy into the man who stood before him now. He wanted to argue. He wanted to beg, but he knew that look in his eyes. He had seen it in the father too. "Go with God," whispered, "and give those bastards hell." Nodded once and walked out. The docking bay was quiet at this hour. Only a skeleton crew monitored the shuttles, and they paid little attention to a man in civilian clothes walking toward the small personal craft at the end of the row, climbed aboard and began the startup sequence. The controls felt strange under his bare hands. He was used to the thick gloves of his armor. He was entering the coordinates for space when the bay door burst open behind him. Lieutenant Bora ran toward the shuttle, her face red and her breath coming in gasps. She must have run all the way from the crew quarters. She must have heard somehow from someone that was leaving. "Captain," she shouted, "Captain, wait." But the shuttle was already lifting off, already turning toward the stars. Through the cockpit window, could see her standing in the bay, her arm raised as if reaching for something she could not catch. He did not wave back. He did not smile or nod or give any sign at all. He simply looked at her for one long moment, trying to memorize her face. She was young and hopeful and full of belief in a universe that was better than it really was. He hoped she could keep that belief. He hoped the galaxy would be kind to her. Then the shuttle slipped through the force field and into the void, and the starlight accord fell away behind him like a dream fading in morning light. On the bridge, the night crew tracked his trajectory and reported it up the chain of command with confused voices and worried looks. He was heading directly toward territory. He was alone. He had no armor, no weapons, no backup. And he was not slowing down. Ambassador received the report in her quarters an hour later. She read it 3 times, trying to understand what she was seeing. Then she sat down heavily on her bed and stared at the wall. She had wanted him gone. She had wanted his shadow removed from her presence. But she had not wanted this. She had not wanted him to fly off into the darkness like a missile aimed at the heart of an empire. What had she done? What had she set loose upon the galaxy? She did not sleep that night. She sat in the darkness and wondered, and somewhere deep in her heart, a small voice whispered that she had made a terrible mistake. 3 months passed, and the galaxy began to change. It started with whispers, small stories that passed from ship to ship, from station to station, growing larger with each telling. A prison camp on the border world of Vex had revolted. The slaves had overpowered their guards using nothing but tools and timing. Someone had taught them how. Then another camp fell, and another, and another. Ambassador first heard the reports during a routine council briefing. She sat in her chair with her hands folded neatly in her lap, listening as intelligence officers described a pattern of uprisings that made no sense. They were one of the most brutal empires in known space. Their slaves did not revolt. They were too broken, too afraid, too convinced that resistance meant death. But something had changed. "We have confirmed reports of coordinated resistance actions on 17 controlled worlds," the intelligence officer said, his voice professional and calm. "The attacks follow a similar pattern: infrastructure sabotage, communication disruption, organized escape attempts. The methods are consistent across all locations." A delegate from the fish-like species raised a fin. "Are we looking at an organized rebellion? Have the slave species formed some kind of alliance?" "Unknown, but there is one common element in every report." The officer hesitated and felt something cold touch her spine. "Survivors describe a human male who moves between camps. He does not fight himself. He teaches. He shows the prisoners how to resist, how to coordinate, how to turn their chains into weapons." The room fell silent. His mouth went dry. She knew. Before anyone said his name, before anyone connected the dots, she knew exactly who they were talking about. "The human is described as middle-aged with gray hair and scars on his hands," the officer continued. He speaks little but seems to understand every language. He moves through territory like a ghost, appearing in one camp and then vanishing before they can respond. "Do we have identification?" someone asked. The officer looked directly at. "Intelligence believes it is former Captain Park, who departed the Starlight Accord 3 months ago without authorization." Every eye in the room turned to her. Some were curious, some were accusatory, some were afraid. Felt her face grow hot, but she kept her expression neutral. "I was not aware of his destination when he left," she said carefully. "He was dismissed from his duties due to a breach of protocol." "What breach?" She hesitated. "He provided unauthorized assistance to the delegation." Another silence. The representative, who had replaced Speaker Hollow Voice after the old ambassador had died of grief, leaned forward with bright, hopeful eyes. "Assistance?" they asked. "What kind of assistance?" Did not answer. The weeks that followed were chaos. Reports flooded in from across space. Mines were collapsing. Factories were burning. Supply lines were being cut by the very slaves who were supposed to maintain them. They sent armies to crush the rebellions, but by the time they arrived, the rebels had melted away, warned somehow, prepared somehow. And always, there were stories of the human. He walked into a camp on 7 where 1,000 were being held for processing. 3 days later, every guard in the camp was dead, killed with their own weapons, and they were gone. They had escaped through tunnels that had taken them 2 months to dig in secret, following a plan that the human had taught them using nothing but hand signals and patience. He appeared on the factory moon of Prime itself, in the heart of the Empire, where slave species worked 18 hours a day making weapons for their masters. Within a week, the factories had stopped, not because of violence, because every slave had learned to work just slightly wrong. Machines broke, products came out defective. They screamed and threatened and killed, but you cannot force quality work from people who have learned that slow resistance is still resistance. Supreme Commander of the military sent his elite hunters after the human. They never found him, but he found them. One by one, they disappeared, and their bodies were discovered later in public places, arranged as warnings. Not killed by human hands, but by the hands of the species they had hunted for generations. The slaves were fighting back, not with armies or warships, but with 1,000 small rebellions, 1,000,000 tiny acts of defiance that were bleeding the empire dry. And then broadcast his message. It came on every frequency, translated into every language, impossible to ignore. He appeared on screens across the galaxy, his reptilian face twisted with rage that was almost human in its intensity. "I speak to the Galactic Council and to all who listen," snarled. "You have sent a demon into our space, one human, one single human, and he has done more damage than your fleets could do in 100 years." Watched the broadcast from her quarters, her hands trembling. "Send your armies if you wish," continued. "Send your diplomats with their empty words. We do not fear them, but call back your human. Call back your monster who teaches our cattle to bite, or I will burn 100 worlds to find him. I will turn every colony, every station, every ship to ash until there is nowhere left for him to hide." The broadcast ended. The galaxy held its breath. Sat in the darkness of her room and tried to understand what she was feeling. It was not satisfaction. It was not pride. It was something stranger, something that twisted in her gut like a living thing. She had called him a monster. She had told him that humanity should be ashamed of people like him. And now the most powerful in history was afraid of him. Not of human fleets, not of human weapons. Of one man who had walked unarmed into an empire of predators and taught the prey how to hunt. A knock came at her door. She composed herself and called for entry. Elder Myra floated in, her ancient body supported by the hover chair she used. Her eyes were knowing and sad. "You have heard the broadcast," the elder said. "It was not a question." "Yes." "And you understand now what you released." Was quiet for a long moment. Then softly she said, "I did not release anything. I simply stopped holding him back." "Is there a difference?" "I do not know anymore." Myra moved closer, her telepathic presence brushing against mine like a gentle hand. "I felt his heart on the day you dismissed him. Do you want to know what I found there?" Did not answer, but she did not say no. "He was not angry with you. He was not bitter or resentful. He was sad. Sad that you could not see what he sees. Sad that you believed peace could be built by abandoning the helpless. Sad that humanity had produced someone who could look at suffering and choose to do nothing because doing something was impolite. I never said to do nothing. I said to find other ways. And while you searched for other ways, children were eaten. While you drafted resolutions and trade sanctions, entire species were harvested." Myra's voice was gentle but firm. "The human understood something that you did not, Ambassador. Sometimes there are no other ways. Sometimes the only choice is between violence and allowing evil to go unchallenged. And choosing to allow evil is itself a form of violence, the worst kind, because it pretends to be peace." Felt tears burning in her eyes. She had not cried in years. She had trained herself not to, because tears were weakness and diplomats could not afford weakness. But the tears came anyway. "What have I done?" she whispered. "You showed a protector that his own people did not want him, so he went to find people who did." Myra paused. "The question now is what you will do next." "What can I do? He is somewhere in space. The galaxy's most wanted man. Even if I could find him, what would I say? Perhaps nothing, perhaps everything. Perhaps you simply need to see what your words created." Myra's ancient eyes held hers. "He is not hard to find, Ambassador. You simply have to follow the freedom." She left alone with her thoughts, and the silence was heavier than any accusation. A week later, requested leave from the council. She gave no explanation. She simply boarded a small diplomatic vessel and set course for the border. She was going to find him. She was going to understand. And maybe, if she was very lucky, she was going to learn. 6 months after Park left the Starlight Accord, the Empire fell. It did not fall to fleets or armies. It did not fall to the weapons of mighty civilizations. It fell to the people it had enslaved for centuries, rising up in a wave of coordinated rebellion that no amount of military force could stop. You cannot fight an enemy that is everywhere. You cannot crush a rebellion when every slave, every servant, every lesser species has learned that chains can be broken. The command fortress on their burned last of all. It was a massive structure of black stone and iron, built on the bones of 1,000 conquered peoples. For generations, it had been the symbol of power, the place where planned their conquests and counted their slaves. Now it was ruins. Ambassador walked through what remained of the main hall, her diplomatic robes dusty and torn from the journey. The air smelled of smoke and something else, something that might have been freedom. Around her, freed slaves moved through the wreckage, salvaging what they could and burning what they could not. No one stopped her. No one even looked at her twice. She was just another figure moving through the chaos, searching for something she was not sure she would find. She found him in a courtyard behind the fortress, sitting on a broken pillar among a group of children. They were children, their compound eyes bright with curiosity as they watched the human arrange small stones on the ground before him. "The trick is balance," was saying in the simple, careful voice of a patient teacher. "You take turns placing stones on top of each other. The one who makes the tower fall loses." He placed a stone with steady hands, demonstrating. It teaches patience. It teaches control. It teaches that sometimes the smallest movement can bring down the largest structure. The children listened with the intense focus of young ones who had never been allowed to play before. One of them, a tiny girl with a crack in her exoskeleton, reached out and carefully placed her own stone on the pile. "Good," said softly, "very good." Stopped at the edge of the courtyard and watched. The man before her was not the soldier she remembered. He was thinner, worn down by months of constant movement and danger. New scars marked his hands and face, white lines against weathered skin. His hair was longer, gray and tangled, and his clothes were the simple garments of a refugee, patched and repatched until almost nothing of the original remained. But his eyes were the same, calm and dark and full of that terrible, patient grief that Elder Myra had sensed so long ago. He knew she was there. She could tell by the small pause in his movements, the slight tension in his shoulders. But he did not look up. He simply continued the game with the children, placing stone upon stone with infinite care. Waited, she had come all this way. She could wait a little longer. Finally, the tower fell. The children squealed with delight and smiled, a small and fragile expression that transformed his weathered face into something almost gentle. He said something to them in their own clicking language, and they scattered, laughing, to play in the ruins. Only then did he look up at her. "Ambassador," he said, no surprise, no accusation, just a simple acknowledgement. "Captain," the word felt strange in her mouth. "Or should I say former captain? I do not know your rank anymore. I do not know if you still claim one." "I do not." He stood slowly, his movements stiff with old injuries and new ones. "I am just a man now, no title, no authority, no armor." "And yet you brought down an empire." "I did not bring down anything." He gestured at the freed slaves around them, at the children now playing in the ashes of their prison. "They brought it down. I simply showed them that it was possible." Walked closer, picking her way through rubble and debris. Up close, she could see just how much the months had taken from him. He looked old, fragile, human in a way that his armor had always hidden. "I came to apologize," she said. He considered this for a moment, then nodded slightly. "I know." "You know." "Elder Myra contacted me. She said you were searching. She said you carried guilt like stones." His eyes met hers. "You do not need to carry it. You spoke truth. I am everything you said." "No," the word came out harder than she intended. "I was wrong. I was so wrong, and I could not see it because I was too proud and too afraid." "You were not wrong, Ambassador. Humans are violent. We are exactly what the galaxy fears. I have killed more beings than I can count. I have broken bodies and ended lives and spread destruction wherever I went." He paused. "But you were not completely right either." "What do you mean?" He turned and looked out at the courtyard, at the children playing, at the freed slaves helping each other through the wreckage. "Violence is not only destruction. Sometimes it is the wall between the helpless and the things that hunt them. Sometimes it is the fire that burns away chains. Sometimes it is the only language that tyrants understand." He looked back at her. "You wanted humanity to be more than warriors. That is a good want. I share it. But we cannot become more by pretending we are not what we are. We cannot build peace by abandoning those who need our strength." Felt the tears coming again, and this time she did not try to stop them. "The council wants to honor you. They want to give you medals and titles and make speeches about your bravery. They want you to come back." "And what do you want?" The question cut through all her careful preparation. She had rehearsed 100 speeches on the journey here. She had planned what she would say, how she would phrase her apology, what arguments she would use to convince him to return. But now, standing before him in the ruins of an empire, all those words turned to dust. "I want to understand," she said finally. "I want to know how you did it, how you walked into the darkness alone and lit fires that burned down walls, how you kept going when everyone told you to stop, how you stayed human when you had every reason to become a monster." Was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked over to a pile of stones and picked up 2 of them, small and smooth from the hands of playing children. "Do you know why I taught them this game?" he asked. "No." "Because it has no violence in it, no conflict, just patience and balance and the simple joy of building something together." He held out one of the stones to her. "I spent my whole life learning how to destroy, how to break and burn and end. But destruction is easy. Anyone can destroy. The hard thing, the truly hard thing, is knowing when to stop, knowing when to put down the sword and pick up the stone. He pressed the small rock into her palm. That is what humans can be, ambassador, not just warriors, builders, teachers, the ones who show others that they can be more than what their chains tell them. Looked at the stone in her hand. It was warm from his touch, smooth from children's fingers, such a small thing, such an ordinary thing. "Will you come back?" she asked. "No." The answer was gentle but final. He turned and looked toward the horizon, where smoke still rose from distant fires and freedom still spread like a sunrise. There are more walls that need building, more chains that need breaking, more children who need to learn that they are not helpless. He looked back at her one last time. "But you could help, not with weapons, not with soldiers, with words, with treaties, with all the tools you spent your career mastering." "I do not understand." "I can teach people to free themselves, but freedom is fragile. It needs protection. It needs laws and treaties and the kind of boring, difficult work that soldiers cannot do." He smiled, and it was sad and hopeful all at once. "I break the chains, ambassador. Someone else has to build the world that comes after." He began to walk away, toward the horizon, toward whatever desperate world needed him next. Watched him go, a thin figure against the smoke and ruins, and she finally understood. He was not a monster. He was not a relic. He was a seed planted in darkness, growing toward light that only he could see. And maybe, just maybe, she could learn to see it too. She looked down at the stone in her hand. Then she put it in her pocket, close to her heart, and began the long walk back to her ship. There was work to do, different work than she had imagined, harder work, better work. And somewhere out there, in the darkness between stars, a man without armor walked toward another world of chains, carrying nothing but his voice and his patience, and the unshakable belief that even the smallest stone could bring down an empire. The galaxy had feared humanity's violence for centuries. Now it was beginning to understand something far more frightening. Humanity's hope.